All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Bowmen podcast. We're here at the Kafaru headquarters in Wheat Ridge, Colorado.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Yeah, and we actually took notes. We have camera gear laying around. We have our cell phones out in case we have to look up data because we generally get it wrong when we guess.
Yeah, so please don't be like, you're distracting me when you look at your cell phone. We'll be on our cell phones looking things up throughout the podcast.
Periodically, yeah.
I promise I'm not texting.
There's too many lenses and cameras to memorize everything in every setting. Now, we're going to go over a few different things. And keep in mind, I am a photographer. At heart, my soul is into it. I hate videoing anything, which Brian will attest to. Like, when I say hate, when he hands me the camera, I'll video, but in my brain the entire time through a hunt, I can tell you my brain never says, wow, you should have videoed that, ever. Where Brian, complete other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I never think, I should have snapped a photo.
Yeah, yep. And so when you're hearing from both of us, you're going to be hearing from me from a photographer's perspective, meaning battery life, like why I chose specific cameras when I'm going through like the different steps to become a better photographer, things like that. It is all just photography, where Brian is going to be covering more of the videography. I guess that a word? Videography. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to break it down, basically.
Yeah.
The first is basically things you need to do, just like, 101 photography.
And before Aaron jumps into that, I just want to throw a little disclaimer out there. Neither of us have been to like film school, other than, I did like a 2-day thing with Grady Rawls, good friend of mine, and got some crash courses on a 2-day, but not really like college level stuff here.
I hung out with a professional photographer that makes lots of money, and now I know multiple professional photographers.
Yeah.
And I copy what they do or do what they tell me, basically.
And all I wanted to say was, Aaron and I'm sure there's other ways to do this and people far more capable and skilled at giving you this information. We're just going to share what we know and what we think. So whatever we share is limited to our experience and what we've tested. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, and somebody may not agree with us. That's okay. We're just sharing our what we know so far.
Right, for sure. So I think the first thing we wanted to cover on this first section is just the basic parts of a camera for photo, video, ISO, how to do your settings.
We've covered this before in earlier podcasts on camera gear, but we're just going to do a really quick, camera 101, so we're all on the same page as we move forward with the podcast.
Right, and on the camera, you've got specific settings. You've got autofocus or manual focus and different focal points and a ton of different adjustments. You have white balance, where you can adjust multiple different white balance options. You have
and for people who don't know white balance, the camera doesn't, sometimes depending on the lighting, especially indoors, it's a problem. Mm-hmm. It can make your film really yellow or really blue or red.
Gray.
It can change it because the lighting is artificial.
And what I would suggest is everything that we're about to mention, Google it and go into a great detail, because you need to know these things or you'll never take great video or photos.
YouTube is an incredible teacher.
Yeah.
So white balance, if you look up white balance, you'll learn everything. But that's one of the key,
more or less, the temperature
issues
of your photo, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Color temperature.
Yep, color temperature. And then you have ISO. You know what? I can't even remember what ISO stands for. It's the acronym.
And I would say what you have is exposure. And that's how much, it's whether your picture's too bright or too dark or just right. And there are 3 variables that affect exposure.
Yep, ISO, shutter speed, and your aperture, your f-stop, basically. And these 3 things are your God, basically, of a photo. We'll go into some other things later on, but ISO, the way that I explain it, which is very redneck, that is just pulling in all light.
It's artificial light. It's like a little mini light inside the camera that artificially lights the sensor.
And what it's doing to the photo is it's enhancing or decreasing anything bright or white or light. I should say white, but bright outside of the photo. So if you had a teepee with stars, a headlamp, and a fire, And with a high ISO, those things are going to be very bright, and it's going to suck a bunch of light out of them. And if your ISO is really low, they're going to be dim. That's a very redneck way to explain it.
Yeah.
But I think that covers it.
I mean, yeah. And for me, I would say that you have with aperture, that's an iris built into your lens, the actual lens on your camera, and that iris opens or closes depending on your setting. So you can make it really small, which lets a lot, like closes off the light, chokes it off, and you make it really big, which lets in a lot more light. And you have shutter speed, which is kind of like how fast the shutter opens, like a shutter on a window. It opens. The longer it sits open, the more light comes in. And then your ISO is that artificial light inside the camera that lights it. So there's a pros and cons to each one.
Right.
With aperture on your lens, when that iris is wide open, and the faster, the more it can open, the more you get that blurry look.
So I'll give you an example real quick. If someone on one of my night shots says, what were your settings? Generally, you're going to hear something like me. So with ISO 1600, 20-second shutter speed, 2.8 for my aperture. Pretty much. Okay, so my aperture is wide open, meaning that eyeball or the
iris
wide open when it shoots. The shutter speed is how long my eyeball stayed open. It stayed open for 20 seconds. So once I hit the shutter, wide open 20 seconds.
1/20th of a second.
20 seconds. 20 seconds it's open, not 1/20th. 20,
you're
20. Night shot.
Yeah, night shot. I forget.
It screws people up because they're like 20 seconds or
like
30.
20 seconds. That's a long time.
I've gone to bulb in dark photos, which is how people are, how they do even get that shot. And I hold my whatever, the little, what am I trying to say? My
remote control.
And on bulb, I just hold it down. I'll hold it down for a minute. And then the one lady or those bugs that are bright, you'll hold it down and eventually it'll stay open long enough that it will pick up whatever light is in that photo. So again,
it's like a long exposure is what you call that.
Long.
And that's how you get like a waterfall that's coming down, and you'll see those photos where it's all blurry.
Yeah, well, and you won't need to go that long for that unless you have basically a pitch black ND filter. But yeah, that's how you do it. And again, this is confusing. We could have 80 videos covering all of this, but we're going to just hit the redneck high points. So then the ISO is going to be in that same shot if I have a 20-second shutter speed. If it's pitch blackout, my ISO is going to be 1600, and what that's going to do is help the stars pop, bring out some of the Milky Way. A lot of the stuff I'll handle in post-processing, but if you don't know ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, you're screwed.
Yep. So, and typically, the way that the way I run it is I usually get my aperture how I like it first, then I set my shutter speed how I want it, and then I let ISO up or down to kind of make up for my exposure, like the last variable. But that's depends on the conditions, and it can completely change
in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Literally 5 minutes, it can change totally, especially for me with photos, which is even worse for you with video.
Yeah. So we'll get into that a little bit later because there are limitations with video that photographers don't have to adhere to. And I guess we can talk about that.
You can
talk about how to
7 hours straight. As far as that goes, it's insane.
But it's not that complicated. If you go out and you
read your manual and learn.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that really helped me learn was I went to michaelthemaven.com.
Yeah, he's got a good YouTube page.
Yep, and he has tutorials you can download, and for whatever camera you own, he has some tutorials that are like basic, how to just get started with your camera. So if you have an A7S II or an A6300 or a Canon 70D, you can find the tutorial for that camera. And if you watch that and at the end of it you don't know how to, like, what all those variables mean and how to use your camera, we can't help you. So good. Look, you can learn. It's like $35, I think, for the tutorial.
Yeah, and then Dwayne's behind the camera. He just wrote down take notes. I suck at taking notes. Barely graduated high school. I take notes for photography just as a brush over for later. But I would say that those three are the most important, and then learning your autofocus and when and why. Not all autofocus settings are the same. You can't run one all the time. White balance is important, learning your white balance. And then after that, your exposure value, when to drop that, when to brighten it, when you've composed a shot and you're looking where, if you want to shoot where you have shaded and light situations. One of the ways Brian is able to get his video to look the way it does, and I'm able to get my photos the way that they are, is because of the settings we put that camera at. It's vital. You can't just put everything on auto. So if you can imagine later on when you're taking a photo or you're looking at something and in your mind's eye you're seeing it, those settings are what will bring that photo to what you saw in your mind's eye, if that makes any sense. And it's vital that you learn them all. And again, there's probably, I don't know how many millions of YouTube. You can find whatever you want to know on YouTube. Everyone says basically the same thing for the most part, I would say on those. Mm-hmm. But some people say it. Michael the Maven's one. What's the other guy? Mike Granger, I think, is another guy.
Yeah, Fro knows.
Yeah. But
I also like Who Is Matt on YouTube.
Yeah, he's funny. There's a bunch of them, but I can tell you will find your favorite because some of them I cannot listen. There's a French guy. Wonderful photographer.
I'm going to choke him out.
Oh, Lord. It's horrible. Great photographer, but I can't listen to his tutorials. And again, once you get to a certain level of videography or photography, you're going to hit a plateau where you're going to need more juice to figure out maybe how to up your ante in the photography or videography game. You're going to have to find... you're going to have to really study, learn, and play with your camera. A lot of guys I know take good photos, turn the camera on, they've learned aperture or whatever, screw around just like I did. But once you get more into more tight, harder situations, let's say, low light is horrible. Bright sunny days, horrible. All of those things is going to be where your rough point is and where learning those 3 steps are going to make you better. So.
And I would say, we probably beat this like a dead horse, for people who already know these things. But we just wanted to give kind of a basic overview of just to encourage you to get out, use manual modes, learn ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, and white balance, and start messing around with your camera.
That's why I think one more thing we should cover before we go into part 2 is on your camera, on the higher end ones especially, you're going to, when you twist this little knob here, you're going to see it says
menu knob?
auto. Yeah, it's my menu knob, but it says auto, and then it says PASM, and I got a 1 and 2. I got a film. I got this rectangle looking thing. I don't know what it is. It's actually for shooting a panorama, and I have seen most pro level cameras don't have all of these. This is a pro level camera. That's a prosumer camera. We'll go into that later. A is aperture priority. What that means is all I have to adjust for the most part is my aperture. Meaning I can put my ISO on auto or you can put it on manual, but the shutter speed the camera will take care of, best case scenario, to bring what the camera feels is the proper lighting outside.
I think a lot of photographers use aperture priority, like Aaron, because it allows you to set that bokeh and that image you want.
Sun's out, guns out, right? Sun's out, aperture out. Like low light, I'm manual, everything.
Yep.
The sun's out 99.9% of the time. Aperture priority, ISO is on manual. And
after that, you just let the camera determine the shutter speed.
And if the shutter speed's too bright, I'll sometimes bump down my exposure value. All things you guys will learn if you follow anything we have to say. Now, shutter, which is more, I don't ever do shutter, but for for videography, it's the other way around. You have it on shutter a lot, don't you? Actually,
no.
There you go. See how much I know? Just kidding. I don't have it on there yet. The one thing I've learned with shutter is if I'm going to shutter personally, I might as well clicker one more and go to manual. Because if I've gotten to where I need to use shutter priority, I might as well just do full manual the whole way. And so really I don't know that I've ever taken a photo other than when the button moved on accident on shutter priority. It's aperture or manual or custom for me.
I think right now, Aaron, if we get into these menu settings and how we're doing it, how we're, how you're shooting, that we should just assume from now on that we're talking to an audience that understands
might be different. Yeah.
All the exposure and white balance, what we're already talking about.
Yeah, no, for sure. But that's what those mean, the A, S, and M. The only reason I brought it up is this morning I had a question about that, and the guy just didn't know. He thought A was auto.
Yeah.
And so it's aperture priority. So that's with the shutter speed, aperture, ISO, whatever. That's where that comes into play on this diet.
So Aaron and I are going to go into another podcast that's a lot more detailed, that we're assuming that you already know all these things we talked about today.
Yep. And then we're going to hit another podcast above and beyond that is basically just general rules of thumb to be a better photographer and questions we get asked frequently, and a videographer. Just a list, 15 things, do and don't.
Yep. I'll tell you how I run my camera, all the settings I run it on for film. And that would have been particularly helpful to me a year, 2 years, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Had I had that. So now this stuff's like a snowball. It grows. So the more knowledge you get, the more you can build on that going forward. It sounds like Greek. I remember being there where none of it made any sense, and everything that Aaron and I just talked about meant nothing. So, but it's really quite simple once you get the hang of it and you figure out these things.
Yep. And the final podcast will basically be on what we feel is, for our particular style, the best, more or less, backpacking full frame camera or high-end camera. We'll just say that the best for the reason, for whatever specific reason. So we'll cover quite a bit of things.
Bingo.
All right.
Stay gritty.